rocks around the Billy Squire, big beat, pound wow, rocks around the Billy Squire, big beat, pound wow, rocks around the Billy Squire, big beat, pound wow, rocks around the Billy Squire, big beat, pound wow, big beat.
Oh, how are you doing, Louis?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm also good. Yeah. It's the return of the heat. I'm topless again.
I'm sure you're topless most of the time when we've recorded these, to be fair, percentage-wise. It's at least
It's
at least
probably about
two.
50-50
And we've
hit
only
so
done
far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've only done 4 so far.
Oh, it's been very hot.
So to be fair, I can't blame you, it is Mafton. It was supposed to start raining, wasn't it?
I know.
Like it's supposed to be thunderstorms and stuff to cool us down, but it's been disappointingly dry.
This took me by surprise today because it was I don't know whether it was the same up north, but it was quite a cool morning. And then just sometime just after lunch, it just swept in with this overbearing heat again. It just took me by surprise. Like, wasn't expecting it.
Have you been making the most of it? Have you been doing anything over the weekend?
That's a good question. Very much, not gonna lie. I was gonna go to the river, but then trains on Saturday. So I didn't do that. I mean, obviously full support to the strikes. And then yesterday just went to this Irish pub in Brixton, which is pretty cool. I'd never been there before. Proper like small little Irish pub with people playing all their fiddle and guitar and that. Like just sat down in the seats in amongst the kind of rest of the pub crowd. It's lovely, very nice.
That does sound really chill, to be fair. I rate that.
How about you? You been up to much?
Yeah, so these past 2 weekends, I don't know if have I told you about Hebden before?
I'm not sure. Like Hebden Bridge.
No, everyone always
Is
assumes
that-
it's Hebden Bridge. It's
No.
the other Hebden. There is a place called Hebden Bridge, but it's not Hebden Bridge.
Yeah.
It's Hebden, which is near like Grassington. It's in the Yorkshire Dales, and basically one of my friends has like a family home there that their like granddad built.
Is it the place you go to with your mates?
That's the one, yeah. So it's like a yearly tradition.
Yeah, I think I know of this place.
Always
yeah.
around this time of year, and so it was last week, but I didn't take the full week off from work because I only have so many days of leave to play with. So I just took like this weekend gone, and the weekend before I took the Friday off. So finished work Thursday night and then drove up to the house, and then had Thursday night through to Sunday night both weekends. And then just in that middle bit where I was working, try to pretend that I wasn't really there, like mentally clocked out, so that I could pretend that it was like an ongoing holiday, which didn't really work. But the 2 weekends did feel like 2 separate holidays. And with the weather we've been having, it was like absolutely glorious, especially because it's like higher up. So there was enough wind to kind of keep you fairly cool. Like it was still very warm, obviously, but like it felt like being on a European holiday. It was perfect. And we did loads of like swimming and stuff because there's like rivers and waterfalls and all sorts of pools around that kind of area, like natural water, the kind of swimming we did in New Zealand and stuff like that, like lakes and rivers and stuff.
Oh yeah, that sounds pretty
good. Lots of that, keeping cool, keeping refreshed, some nice little walks, and then just like card games, board games, drinking, all the good stuff. So feeling very relaxed, very zen.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm very impressed with the way that you guys have managed to maintain that over so many years. It's although maybe it's once you make it like a ritual, a tradition, that it's actually easier to organize because it's kind of just accepted that it will happen. Whereas trying to organize something afresh, I suppose, can be a challenge. That's for sure.
I think you've hit the nail on the head because it is the thing that happens. Like every year we know we're gonna try and do Hebden. And I think it's something would have to actively get in the way, like the pandemic did, to kind of stop it from happening. But because we know it's gonna be there, everyone kind of like keeps it in mind, keeps a few days of leave clear, and it gets kind of brought up fairly early on. And it's kind of a no pressure thing. Like if you can't make it, then it's a shame, but you'll always make next year's. And because it's easy to get to, it's like an hour and a half drive from where we live. And like if you live further afield, you can, obviously come along or whatever. But it means that there's no pressure with like flights or anything. Like you don't have to make a solid decision about whether you're going to definitely come or not until like the week before.
Mm.
So it means that it's really low stakes, and we're not a very well organized group usually. So anything that requires more commitment is really like quite a pain in the ass to put together. Like if we tried to do a group holiday abroad with flights and accommodation and paying for things and that would be like a whole thing. But because it's like we don't have to pay to go there, like it's their like family home and stuff, like it just makes it really easy to just swing by and like I did, just pop down for 2 weekends. And yeah, I think that's literally the reason it happens so easily and so regularly.
Makes complete sense. I feel like there's got to be a lesson to learn there somewhere, because there's probably an element of somebody just announces this is the week that works best. And I actually went up to see my family a couple of weekends ago. And that's basically what my dad created, like a whole spreadsheet for the summer.
Oh, I love that.
What everybody was doing. This next level organization. I mean, he loves it.
Me and your dad need to compare spreadsheets, because I made a spreadsheet for Hebden.
Oh, so you're the guy. That's yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what my dad's like, and it is incredibly helpful, because it did mean that we all got to be at my parents' house all at the same time, for certainly in terms of having the sort of brother and sister-in-laws as well. The first time since pre-pandemic. It was my first time seeing Alex, my brother-in-law, since 2018, I think.
Wow.
So that was lovely, and saw one of my new nieces. So there's 3 nieces. 2 of them have met before. One's the sort of slightly older one, 2 years old, and then sort of 2 that have just been born just this year. And I'd met one of them, and the other one I hadn't met. So and hadn't seen them all together, and that was just, it was lovely, really nice, very wholesome family vibes. Children are tiring, it turns out, as is just having lots of people in one place at once. But all of that aside, also quite just nice and refreshing and rejuvenating. I'm trying to think of other words. It's not necessarily that you feel less tired afterwards, because you don't necessarily.
It tires you out in a different way, because you're like doing activities, and like you say, you're looking after the young ones and you're socially interacting. But like I think there's something just like wholesome and like good for the soul, like about
for life. I think is probably
getting together with family or getting out. Yeah,
I think that's the vibe.
Just kind of rejuvenates you. I think that's the best word. That's how I felt after Hebden. Is I just feel like it feels like you know how like New Year is everyone's kind of reset point, but that's just kind of because it's the societally accepted reset point. I feel Hebden for me this year, I don't know if it's been this case every year, but Hebden for me this year has felt like my like take a breather, take a beat, right, reset point. And now that it's done, I'm like, right, let's reassess and go forth.
Yeah, I don't know whether like, I mean, I feel that, I don't know whether this is a fair description, but I feel like rejuvenate captures the sort of that element of the soul kind of being. Maybe we're reading far too deeply into this, but it's that element of the soul being refreshed rather than just your body being refreshed. Refreshed sounds too kind of physical.
Yeah.
Rejuvenated sounds kind of like it cuts to the core of very spiritual, but not necessarily in the spiritual sense.
Yeah.
We've really gone off.
We both know what we're getting at. Whether anyone listening has any idea what we're getting at is another thing.
There's a point in there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I just saw a video today, actually. This is very loosely connected, but I was thinking about whether I could bring it up. I just thought it was so nice that I wanted to. And so I want to recommend it to people. But Kurt Vonnegut, who Alex was obsessed with and introduced me to. I don't know whether you've ever read any Kurt Vonnegut books.
The name definitely rings a bell. I feel like Alex has definitely talked to me about him.
Alex loved him. His most famous one is like Slaughterhouse-Five, which is basically his coming to terms with Dresden, because he was in Dresden when it was like firebombed.
Oh wow!
But he's kind of just a lovely humanist and humorist author. But he's got a lecture that you can find on YouTube about I think it's called like The Shape of Stories or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
just kind of quite funny as much as anything else. But he kind of goes through and talks about all these kind of major narrative structures in terms of a character going through stuff that's good and stuff that's bad. And you have like, sort of like he calls one character falls into a hole, which is basically characters going at a steady level, suddenly it falls into a hole in a sort of metaphorical sense. It doesn't have to be a literal hole, and then gets out of that hole. And he does all of that, and then he sort of proceeds to kind of like talk about how actually sort of some of the greatest narratives, the line's not very clear because in the moment it's always ambiguous what's good or bad, and he uses Hamlet as an example. But then he sort of goes on to say, essentially, the sort of lesson he gets from it is we should really just appreciate when we do catch those good moments. It's a really simple lesson, but we should just appreciate them. And he talks about like the thing that his uncle would always say, which is, well, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And I just thought that brought a real smile to my face. And what's
Yeah.
amazing is that like he kind of ends the lecture on that, and because of just the good vibe of the whole lecture, you do suddenly realize, oh, that was just one of those moments.
Yeah.
And
This
it's
was
just
nice.
a beautifully constructed little lecture, and I felt very good after watching it. And it was right at the start of my day, so it kind of like felt like waking up and watching a motivational video. If motivational videos weren't cynical shite, excuse the language there.
Oh, I might have to bleep that one. You just ruined the whole nice, wholesome vibe with a nasty swear word.
Well, I did show the podcast to my family, and
Oh yeah.
Very positive reviews, but my dad did say to mind the language. So now I'm suddenly very conscious of the fact that there might just be all of these swear words that I wasn't even noticing.
Yeah. Oh no, I feel
so
quite. So I want to swear in front of your parents even less than you do. I don't want to make a bad impression.
It's all right. They'll have given up by the time they get to here. So I think we're in the clear there.
Yeah, I think I might leave it a little while before showing my parents. I feel like I'm not quite brave enough yet to do that. I've definitely been talking about it to a lot of my friends, but I haven't done the big let's all sit down together and listen.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't quite do that. I let them listen in their own time, but
Which episode did they listen to?
It. I think they started from the beginning. I just sort of mentioned it in, but then they've continued listening because they went up to Scotland last week. So I got a message saying, I mean, I think my dad's trying to become our agent. He was saying like, oh, you can message all of the artists. You can. He had a whole game plan for how to expand the podcast. So
wow.
Once we start raking in all the money from that McDonald's sponsorship, we can hire
Well, we
can
do some spreadsheet comparison, me and your dad, and then talk strategy.
Yeah, that's it, Louis. You've won him over with the spreadsheet stuff, so I won't worry about the swearing.
I did notice a spike in listens, and I didn't know what to necessarily attribute to. So I guess it's the Ronan family.
It's probably a time.
We did hit we hit 69 plays as well yesterday.
Wow,
which was nice.
God, that's
nice.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Considering you've done like yeah, just a satisfying number, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
nice.
That is impressive. That is impressive. I actually haven't been telling people too widely about it. So like I've told Hannah, but I don't think Hannah's listened yet. So we can slag her off as much as we want. You know, she's not gonna know.
You've already put in so many digs, Ron, and you've already burnt all those bridges.
Hannah, I just can't help myself. You know, that Hannah.
Yeah. I mean, considering it's basically just friends listening, it's a nice number of streams. No promotion. I have just made a little Instagram page, but I don't really know what to do with it. So currently it's just got a few like this episode's available and this episode's available, but I feel like you want to be kind of more creative posting wise. And obviously it's got no followers or anything like that. I don't really know how to do. I did a social media internship and I still don't really know how to do social media in a way that doesn't feel forced and cynical and gross. I kind of don't like playing the game, but I think that's how you have to do it. But
I don't know. I think I like. I mean, yeah, you do if you're really certain about wanting to expand, you have to do the whole
That's true.
Mr. Beast shock reaction kind of. But I genuinely despise that. It's what makes me realize I'm an old man, because when I see stuff like that, I just lose all faith in humanity. Genuinely, there's something about seeing those shock reaction faces, and also YouTube's clearly developed this standardized thing that you can apply to your thumbnails, where it like accentuates the eyes and like the colors, and it's so obvious it creeps me out. It's like they've cracked a code for things that make humans click. I think it just gives me almost like an existential anxiety, because it's like you realize how basic
they've boiled down the human code.
Yeah,
they've just figured
exactly.
out how to make
it just disturbs me. But I've got an idea for the Instagram, which is actually probably just too much work. But if there's like a little snippet that is just good from the show, especially if you could just have a tangent from each, or maybe like a snippet where we sort of like concisely say what's good about the album. You could do your little like spinning album wheel that you have on the YouTube, have that, and just have the little clip playing for each episode.
Yeah, like a taster.
Full episode. Yeah, and just something that's kind of a bit light, a bit funny, or if we manage to ever say something insightful about the music, something like that.
That'll be the day. That'll be the day we retire. Is when we do an insightful episode. We've peaked. We can't go back. Well, shall we make an attempt at saying something insightful about this album?
We can give it a crack. Go on.
More of something else entirely.
I mean, it's your pick, isn't it? So do you want to give us a little introduction?
Go on. I haven't actually thought through exactly what I'll say about this, but I think
just make it up off the dome.
I mean, that's what I'm gonna do, which always slightly scares me. As I introduced it last week, I think this is kind of the key way to frame it. It is pretty much one of the big Bristol 3, I suppose, album-wise. The 3 albums that spurned 1,000,001 coffee table albums. It's kind of hard to... Trip hop became a kind of the soundtrack to every coffee shop, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get at. And some of it incredibly bland because of that. It's also a precursor in some ways to even things like the sort of instrumental chill hop that you get on YouTube and stuff like that. Basically the spawn of a million sort of copycats, but this was part of the sort of original wave that came out of Bristol and was labelled by British music journalists trip hop. So you had Massive Attack's Blue Lines, Portishead's Dummy, and then you get Tricky, Maxinquaye. And trip hop basically comes out of, and you really do have to sort of talk about them all together, because it comes out of a very collective music culture. It comes out of sound system culture, and this is bound to be something that will come up again on different podcasts, but sort of Caribbean sound system culture, I suppose, in particular, and then that sort of comes over here with the diaspora, is a huge bedrock of pretty much all electronic music, and this is just no different. But this specifically comes out of the Bristol sound system scene, and early on, sort of trip hop was kind of so I've seen like Massive Attack call it sort of lovers hip hop. So there was like this sort of genre that was lovers rock, which was basically reimaginings of sort of like pop tunes with kind of Jamaican song structures, I suppose. And this was like lovers hip hop, where you take hip hop but sort of use those production methods to create pop tunes, I suppose, of sorts. Anyway, that's a long-winded way to say this is a trip-hop album. And specifically a Bristol trip-hop album, an original one. And I think one of the things that's cool about it is in this early stage of trip hop, it hadn't become bland coffee table music.
No.
I suppose. Not that I'm, completely averse to the sort of bland coffee table side.
It has its purpose, doesn't it? It plays a role. Be background music.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, and there's some stuff like really good stuff that comes out of that. But this is a bit more experimental, and of the three, this is arguably the most experimental.
Yeah.
I'd say certainly the most varied. It's got a full sort of variation of sounds. And last thing to say on it in terms of the more personal relationship, I suppose Tricky I came to much later, so that in itself is interesting. But sort of trip hop I came across in my first year of uni. I'd heard sort of my dad play some old Massive Attack and Portishead records and stuff. But in terms of doing a deep dive, I sort of came into it in first year of uni, and it really just shaped a lot of my music taste. It sort of had a knock-on cascading effect. So I think I've got that love of the genre and that original Bristol sound there that made me want to choose one of them, and I've just happened to choose Tricky's.
Yeah. I was my first question to you was going to be like, how did you kind of come across this album? Because I was going to ask, like, it feels like, with it being from 1995, like an older album, it does feel like one of those ones that could have been, on your dad's regular kind of like playing in the background, and then you kind of get that filter through. But it was one that you kind of came to. Do you remember why? Like in first year, you came to trip hop. Was it like the people you were around, or was it just one of those kind of musical discovery days where you stumbled across it?
It's definitely one you kind of are aware of anyway, but that this was one from my dad, I think, that sort of triggered this sort of deep dive, because I think he'll have just been playing Massive Attack or Portishead anyway, and we had this conversation about it, and he was sort of talking about it in the context of the Bristol scene, which I do think just makes it more interesting. The way he described it almost was that it was sort of come down music, I guess, and I think that's quite an apt description, because
that is bang on for this album. Yeah,
it's not just come down for the night, it's come down emotionally for an era as well, I think, and that maybe that's something we can get onto in a little bit when we start to talk about the sort of sound of the album and the feelings of the album. But yeah, it's sort of come down, I think, works as like a double entendre here for the kind of the vibe of the album and its significance.
I'll admit, I found it very interesting when you brought this album up last week, and you were like, "Oh, it's part of the big three." And I'll admit, I don't know if this might be an embarrassing thing to admit, but I'd heard of the other two, but I'd not heard of Tricky, and I didn't realize this was such like a cornerstone album of the genre, and I'll admit it's a genre I've not dabbled as much in, so I think that's probably why there's the gap in my knowledge. But like, I'd never heard of the artist or the album, or I've never heard any of these songs, despite the fact that they all are, very, very regularly played, judging by Spotify. Like, and it's a very well-renowned album. I did a little Google just to get like a bit of background on it, and everybody seems to adore this album, and I can definitely see why. But it's just interesting that for me it was a gap in my like musical knowledge, and I expect we'll find quite a few more of those as we go on, to be fair.
I would say as well that is normal. Even though like I kind of went on this deep dive into Massive Attack, it took me ages to listen to the Tricky album all the way through. And Tricky's on Massive Attack, and Tricky's brilliant. The first two Massive Attack albums, he raps on those, and he's fantastic.
So was he a member, or was he just like a guest appearance?
Yeah, he was a member, I think. But Massive Attack really, and this sort of sums up what I was getting at with how I see Bristol at the time and the Bristol music scene. Massive Attack was a collective. So in a sense, even though it does have members and has become increasingly like a band, I think Massive Attack began as just another sound system, and sound systems are just groups of people who like records and like good sound systems and go around, set up their sort of good speakers and play their good records. I mean, at their very core, that's kind of all it is. And then you can do what you want with that. You can MC on it. You can sort of try and construct your own tracks. You can sort of DJ. You know, it's a very sort of loose form after that, but it is more a collective sort of experience, and one that is just there to celebrate music.
I really like the sound of that. Yeah.
It's cool, and it's just what I think of about Bristol even still. When Alex moved there, I just kept on telling him to listen to these albums because it's to me it sums up the sort of vibe of the city as well in terms of all of that melting pot of influences. You know, it's for a city outside of London in the UK, it's still quite a sort of global feeling city in some ways. And certainly when it comes to its sort of oversized influence on sort of electronic music in particular, I suppose.
Do you know much about why it was Bristol in particular that kind of fostered this scene? I don't know if that's like something you've looked into.
Well, I think it's traditionally sort of framed in terms of its sort of multiculturalism, which really sort of goes back to, I think, the sort of slave era, and that's also kind of why I guess you get the sort of Edward Colston stuff happen there and had particular power there. I think it's kind of, I mean, it was one of the major, if not the most major after London sort of slave ports. So I've always understood that to be sort of part of the context. That's certainly the sort of mythology that's sort of built around it, I think. So it's this sort of cultural melting pot, I suppose. And so with that comes a sort of whole melting pot of different sounds.
I feel like this album's definitely a melting pot of sounds.
Well, let's I'd be interested to hear your sort of first impressions and stuff like that. Let's get into it, because it's been a lot of me meanderingly rambling so far.
No, I genuinely it's so interesting to kind of hear the kind of background to it and kind of your understanding of where it sits like culturally. And if anything, it's making me kind of want to look into it more. But yeah, I found this album quite difficult to make notes on, just because I don't know what it was necessarily about the makeup of it. I guess it was like, you use the word melting pot a lot to describe kind of Bristol and like the music scene culturally. And then also the reason why I wanted to say like this album feels quite melting pot is it feels like there's so many different ideas going on, and they're all very layered over each other, and it feels busy but not in a chaotic way. It's like, I think layered would be the best way to describe it. And it just meant that like I was trying to figure out with each track how it was like making me feel and what like I was experiencing, and it was never quite clean cut. And I think that's why I struggled to make notes. So my notes are very kind of just, they feel like the ramblings potentially of a crazy person, because I've just written down things that popped into my brain. Like, so I've just written down dark, ambient, moody and suffocating, dark whispers, which I don't really know what that means.
These could be tricky lyrics and tricky deliveries on the album. If you just do that but in a slightly more and psychotic tone, you've basically got a new lost tricky song right there.
I've got Paranoia written down. It feels quite like quite a paranoid album, which I think links into what you're saying about it feeling a bit like a come down album. One of the offshoots of that, the meaning of that, it feels paranoid, it feels uneasy. I've written down drug den. Yeah. Which I think I meant like if I was gonna like DJ a drug den, I'd put this on. And I also I wrote down, you can almost smell this album, which I'm not entirely sure where my brain. I was listening to this last night after getting home, and I was like, like sorting my room out a bit and just kind of vibing to it. And I just got, the kind of very drug-induced state of this album. And I think my mind then went to this kind of vision of a drug den. And then at that point, I was like, yeah, I can smell like the, like the mustiness of old weed and
sweat.
That kind of like, yeah, I don't know. That's just that's where it took me to. But yeah, I think because of that, I just found it quite a confusing listen.
I feel like you've captured the album there, the description and your approach to that description. I think what you're saying about it feeling like the slightly manic babblings of a crazy person is very suitable for the album. And I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. Like, so I'd written down paranoid and claustrophobic and things like that, just as sort of pointers for what to talk about. And I think that is one of the things that's quite powerful about it, and it's maybe why I chose this over the other trip hop albums. It's not that the other trip hop albums don't have those darker edges. I mean, they very much is part of the sound in so many ways, but this one perhaps best encapsulates the full range of all of that stuff. And I think what it does by doing that is it takes a more honest approach to reviewing an era that can be very easily romanticized. That sort of second summer of love, I suppose, that sort of came before it. And a similar phenomenon happened, I suppose, with the 60s, where you got this euphoric sense of universality and we're all one and all that, you know, let's all wear daisy chains and hold hands and just be happy. And you get all of that and all the euphoria and romanticization of that. And then it kind of has to come crashing down at some point. And for the 60s, of Hunter S. Thompson, for example, wrote very eloquently on that in sort of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and captured that time. And a similar sort of phenomenon seemed to happen in the late 80s and then the early 90s, where there's this sort of rush of new sort of chemical idealism, you know, with sort of MDMA and rave culture and stuff like that. And inevitably, yeah, you get that come down. You get the sort of paranoia creeping in. You get the you get reality coming crashing back in, and I think and reality with new darker edges sometimes, and that doesn't necessarily do away with some of the euphoria or the sort of the beauty either. But some of the best art can capture all of those things, and I think this does, arguably.
I think, yeah, because it's so richly complex production wise, it captures these kind of dark, sketchy, uneasy feelings, but in a very beautiful way and in a very non-standard way. Like, I feel like this probably stands out more from some of its contemporaries, and it definitely stands out a lot from anything that's kind of coming out now, because it just feels like it's unconventional. It doesn't sound like anything I've really listened to before, or even things of the same genre that are also dark and moody. It doesn't feel as like, not to say that any of those tracks are like necessarily formulaic, but in a way this album feels like it's not following any rules. And again, this is something, there's a lot about this album that I feel like I can't put my finger on and put into words. It's just left me feeling confused, but in the good way. It simultaneously feels deep and solid and also fragile. And I'm just now like listing off different descriptors at odds with each other.
No, I think you've again sort of captured something else about this album, and I think that there's different ways to kind of interpret some of those vibes. But one thing that I was going to note musically is that it's an interesting combination of Tricky, who I don't think is traditionally musical, but really embodies these 20th century ideas of sort of spontaneous genius or kind of like spontaneous inspiration. And that's sort of the Tricky side of the album. That's his sort of musical contributions are just sort of hearing sort of different samples and going, I want to put these together. I think this is going to sound really good. And then that's brought together with a sense of coherence, though still with this kind of mad energy coming from that side. But it's brought together with coherence by the engineer, who I actually haven't written the name down of, but who, yeah, so the engineer is Mark Saunders, and I want to say that he'd worked with The Cure. Basically, he'd worked with some of the major artists of the sort of 80s and of some of the new wave stuff, the post-punk stuff. Essentially a very skilled producer, sort of studio engineer, and that helps to sort of bring together all of those ideas, and at times erratic ideas, into a sort of coherent whole. And I think that's a recurring thing throughout music. I'm sure there are so many examples of those kind of collaborations between a sort of free-thinking genius, if you want, I'm sort of exaggerating to prove the point, but and a kind of like more straight-thinking, kind of inside the box, but technically proficient person. And I think the sound that you're describing, which is simultaneously like it's about to fall apart and yet very rich and full and sort of solid, is perhaps a product of that.
I think because of that, it feels like this would be very difficult to replicate or reproduce.
Oh yeah.
Because it feels so on the cliff edge of each track feels like it could very easily fall into muddy, messy, unlistenable nothing, but it never does. Like it walks the line, but I don't know if that's the kind of thing that you could replicate. It very much seems to be like a little lightning strike.
Yeah, and arguably he didn't. I'm not sure he ever had an album that was as big as this. Not to say that I've not really listened to many of the. I've listened to individual songs, but I've not really listened all the way through any of the other ones. So it's not to say that there's not other sort of great albums in amongst his discography, but I don't think there was one that really made the impact that this did, that I'm aware of.
But I can definitely see why it did make the impact that it had. I think something else I've written down is that it's a very kind of what I'd like to say like a close album. And I think like that links into like why I've written on things like Dark Whispers and things like Suffocating and stuff. It's very close, it's very intimate, and I've written it feels like you're almost inside someone's diary, not just like inside someone's head. You're inside what they've written on the page, what's kind of spilled out of them at the end of the day. There are a lot of like very curious lyrics.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Delivered very oddly. Not it's like I'm trying to pick words that aren't negative, but they all seem to have like a negative connotation. Like oddly has a negative connotation, but it's not oddly badly. It's just oddly like no one else would have written and then performed the lyrics like this. Like it's come from a very specific way of thinking.
I think one of the things that's interesting about that, and I should really have kind of recommended a couple of Massive Attack tunes just as almost like a additional reading, but I'll recommend them now. I'll say from the first album with Massive Attack, I think there's Blue Lines, there's 5 Man Army, and there's Daydreaming. Daydreaming in particular, if you're only going to listen to one, they each have Tricky on rapping, and he's a very proficient, just sort of conventional rapper with not necessarily conventional lyrics. That sounds like almost like an insult, but not the weird lyrics that you get here. Essentially, they're just a fun, vibey lyrics, or at least a bit more vibey. So it's interesting that he's really capable of that, which suggests that this is very much an artistic decision to do what you're saying, which is that almost confessional approach, that confessional but really letting out that sort of the id, you know, like in Freudian terms, the id, and not letting the superego impose upon that, just letting the id run wild. And an example of sort of lyrics, these aren't even the weirdest, actually. I think these are kind of quite, they have a point to them. But on Suffocated Love, there's that line, is it love? No, not love. She makes me finish too quick. The lyrics are kind of full of things like that. Almost quite schoolboy interpretations of romantic relations, of, you know, all sorts of things like that. But because I think it does come with that raw sort of exposure, in a sense.
I'm just trying to find. There was a specific lyric that jumped out of me, and it's a bit crass. But I want to read it word for word. I'm just trying to find. I can't remember which song it was in.
There's one as well. I don't know whether this is the lyric you're thinking of. There's just I want to read it out so that I don't have to like make it up. There's the opening lyrics of Abo and Fat Track is fuck you in, tuck you in, suck you in.
That's not even the one I was going for. But
this really isn't helping the no swearing policy, but
yeah, you've not picked the right album for this. Here we go. So it's not just the lyrics. It's not even just these words, because like I feel like these words you could see in many a song, many a hip hop song, maybe even a pop song if they're feeling particularly edgy. But it's the way it's delivered. It's on the same track that you just named. Abon Fat Tracks? Is that how you'd say it? Abon?
Yeah, I think it was supposedly named because he thought it sounded like an ABBA track, which is quite funny because I'm not sure it does sound like an ABBA track.
It's the line a little further down that goes, "I fuck you in the ass just for a laugh. With the quick speed, I'll make your nose bleed." That little, I mean, it keeps going. The lyrics keep going like that, but it's just delivered so. Like I was listening to this one up. The first time I listened to it, I was listening to it with the lyrics up, and I saw that lyric coming, and I was like, "Wow, that's a very bluntly written line that barely rhymes." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." My brain just like had already kind of presumed how it was gonna be performed, and then it just wasn't. It was just. I don't even know how to describe it. Like it's just kind of said, but softly sung, and like I don't know. Again, just another confusing facet of the album.
Well, something to add to that, which perhaps summarizes again, the almost split personality nature of the album. What's interesting with that song, as happens with most of the songs on the album, and something we haven't mentioned yet actually, but which is really the context of the way that you receive this, both musically and sort of conceptually. Alongside his kind of half-whispered, barely sort of let-out rapping is the vocals of Martina Topley Bird. I think that's the name. So Martina's vocals over the top. So that with that line as well as with most of the others, you have him sort of half whispering it, and you have her singing it, which really adds a sort of complex dimension. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, but I'm sure you could have all sorts of explore that in terms of the mixed gender dynamic, I suppose, in that he's saying it, but she's saying it back to him.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't expect putting the album on, was her vocals, which dominate the whole album. And I would love to know, I'm sure there's been an interview, and I'm sure you could find it, so maybe I will go away and find it. But I'd love to know why he chose that, because the whole vibe the album gives off is that he didn't necessarily choose anything for any reason other than he just liked the way it sounded. And I wonder if it's the same with the lyrics. And I don't know if that's true. Like he might have had, every little simple and beat and lyric might have had complete like artistic vision behind it, but the way the album plays, it just feels like it was all done because it's like, yeah, I'm vibing with this. This feels good. This feels good in the moment. It's an album that feels like it felt good in the moment. And then, like you say, maybe the engineer had to come in afterwards and perform a miracle to
I don't want to indicate that I'm saying that as such. I think it was I see that, although I don't know obviously the full ins and outs, I see that as very much a sort of collaborative sort of achievement, and to be fair, with Tricky sort of behind it as the sort of the driving force, so to speak. But yeah, in terms of
the mastermind.
Martina, I think she was literally his girlfriend. She was some girl that he met and basically just thought she had a nice voice, I guess, and put her on the album. And I don't think it can be understated how important her presence is to the album. I mean, for one thing, some of that sound of the female vocalist over hip hop beats, or trip hop beats rather, alongside Portishead, that is a trope that has been repeated so many times. I mean, that specific sound of the sort of maybe slightly husky kind of female singer is everywhere. I mean, it's sort of then, well, I mean, actually, so another example is Goldfrapp, who's on one of the songs. But I don't know whether you've come across Goldfrapp, but she became really big afterwards with a sound not too dissimilar. And so, yeah, I think that's a sort of defining feature of the sound of the album. And like I was saying, I think it does sort of render even more interesting the nature of the confessional lyrics. I've also read, I mean, Maxinquaye, so his mum, for context, was called Maxinquaye.
Right. Okay.
So I think, I mean, I've read that there's even sort of perhaps of Oedipal dimensions to it, because there's a sort of sexually charged tension, and there's very much the sort of the male voice, female voice of working together, and then the album's named after his mother. I'm not sure whether there's any specific lyrics that kind of indicate that, but I can see the sort of vibe of the album taking on that in that context. But yeah, like last comment to make on sort of Martina's sort of voice in the album is just that it alongside Tricky kind of adds that, especially on say that second track Ponderosa, that very regional element to it. She sort of sings in a Bristolian accent and in a very casual manner, as if it's your mate sat next to you at afters.
Yes.
Just deciding to sing along to a beat.
That's just clicked. You've just there. Sorry, I just having a moment where you saying that I've just like had that realization of, because I was gonna say her singing weirdly reminds me of one of my friends' voices, like her singing voice, and I think that was just my brain subconsciously thinking. Like, I don't know if they even sound that similar, really. I think I was just, because it feels like you're sat listening to someone almost doing it in the same room as you on a casual level. Like, because most of the time when I've experienced my friend singing, it's been seeing them performing or just like hearing them singing in the same room or whatever. So maybe that's what triggered my brain, was like, yeah, it literally just feels like, someone just kind of casually picking up the mic, and I just had a moment of epiphany with that statement.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It really does. Yeah, I think I mean all of the tracks, but especially that one Ponderosa, I just think that the vocal very much sounds like that, and like you say, it sort of gives that element of intimacy. I think was kind of like the word you used before. It is like somebody's kind of just sort of bearing their soul a little bit, and but that sounds too intense. There's a casual manner to it as well. I suppose
it's weirdly like bearing their soul, but not in like, I think throughout the word confessional almost earlier, but I'm not sure it feels confessional in the same way that some of the other albums we've talked about do, where it's like bearing their soul for the public to hear. This really feels like someone's written down a diary entry with no intention whatsoever of it ever being read aloud, and then just sung it aloud, but not for the purpose of like making it public. Literally just, it is just an excerpt of a diary being sung, almost with the intention of it still being private. That's kind of the energy I get from it.
No, I think that I think you've kind of touched something there. I think it feels almost perverted to be peeking in on something like this. It's it's like you've been given special.
It's almost wrong to be listening to it.
Yeah, something that you shouldn't be seeing. There's a kind of voyeurism to it.
I think leading off that, I'd like to know what your kind of go-to listening scenario for this kind of album is. Do you listen to it when you come back to it, when you return to it? Do you listen to it as an album, or do you just pick a few songs off and mix them into playlists? And like, what is the mood you're trying to set? Like, is this a very personal listen, or do you put this on when there's other people around? Like, what's kind of your listening scenario for this kind of music?
Yeah, I think this one covers a few bases. I think because it's got such variation on it, it's less. So I wouldn't like, just because of some of the tracks like Brand New Year Retro, which by the way feels like such a precursor to sort of things like Prodigy's kind of Firestarter and
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
all of that, all of that
definitely.
big, and Fatboy Slim, all of that bigger. Because it's got some moments like that are not even the most abrasive moments on the album, but are just louder and more up tempo. It's less suitable than say Portishead's Dummy or Massive Attack's Blue Lines to play at an afters, say. Whereas I actually think that you could put on either of those other two albums at an afters if you were wishing to just put on a whole album, and they would work brilliantly. So I think for that reason, I like you say, I do probably tend to select songs from Tricky, and some are kind of like you can slip them into any playlist. You can slip them into background playlists. Some feel like you can't do that so much. I think it's an album I come to. There are a few sort of albums like this, but this is one that I come to when I just want to be excited by music again. I think there were just some songs that just make me go, this is what music can do. Not just emotionally, in terms of just conceptually. I mean, it can be abrasive, but it can still be amazing. It can be new and fresh sounding even 30 years after it's been made.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my moods going into it. I also listen to the track. There's elements of the songs. I mean, this is what Portishead's Dummy that is known for. In particular, it's famous for essentially being a kind of erotic mood album. That's the most tasteful way I can put it.
Yeah.
I've read articles before where like people have even asked them, is it just kind of embarrassing knowing that so many people have sort of
done it to your album.
Yeah. I was trying to think of a non-crude way to put it, but yeah, you kind of encapsulated there. So there are songs on this that are sexy, for want of a better word. I feel like sexy makes me just feel like I'm Austin Powers, but and then finally, as well as that, I think the track Struggling, not that I was struggling that much, but when I was unemployed, I just listened to that sometimes, and that was like it was like my blues, essentially. It was my blues track that just sort of like I listened to it, and rather than actually making me feel miserable, it kind of like gave me a sort of sense of conviction. It's like a kind of like a blues track, really. And it's also kind of one of the most interesting and sort of dissonant tracks on the album. It's just it's got like what sounds like a door squeaking or a pig squealing. It's got like a click of or click or a clack of a gun by the sounds of it. And other than that, it's really just a simple, really simple repetitive beat, and more of sort of Tricky's and Martina's kind of typical vocals that have been found throughout the album. So yeah, sorry, you've got quite a few answers to that one.
No, I love that. I love that it's got so much to it that you can come at it from all these different angles and moods, and take something away that kind of fits that vibe. And yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, I think earlier I mentioned that for me the album definitely kind of all flowed into each other, but I think what I meant was more that it was like it works cohesively as an album. But I do find that really interesting that for you can come back in a way that maybe some of the other albums we've talked about. For me, the album that we talked about last podcast, Helplessness Blues, for me is like a complete package. Like, I can throw a couple of their songs into a playlist, but they all kind of hit the same chords. And if I'm just in the mood for that kind of music, I'm like, I might as well listen to the full thing, which I think is like a wonderful way for an album to exist. But I really like this idea that for you, this album is not just, I'm feeling, melancholic or paranoid, or I wouldn't recommend putting on if you're feeling paranoid. It would just definitely make you feel more paranoid. But it's not just the mood that it sets that is the mood that you listen to it in. It's, sometimes you putting on Struggling, or sometimes you putting on, you could definitely throw Brand New Your Retro into this kind of similar playlist like you were saying that have bands like The Prodigy in. And then, like you say, there is just kind of the more kind of chill background beats, and then there's ones that feel too intimate for that. Like they deserve a bit more respect, or they fit a different kind of mood. And I think it's again just really impressive the variety on display in these tracks, and yet the cohesion that exists between them, because they all belong on the album together. Like nothing sticks out like a sore
it's still very
thumb.
much an album.
I think that's again just part of this weird lightning in a bottle moment where it's all come together. These 12 tracks have just come together to form this perfect little package that you can also just extract from.
Yeah, I think that might actually be a perfect moment to move us on to the top songs of the album, if you're ready for that.
Yes, I think so. Would you like to go first, or shall I swoop in and pluck my favorites up, and then you can...
Yeah, I think you can go first.
I'll pluck out. Okay, so I think, oh man, again, this is always the hardest part for me, is picking favorite tracks.
No, it really is.
I really enjoyed, I think, are we saying 3? Are we saying 3 tracks?
You can add as many as you want, really.
Don't say that, because then I'll list off like loads of them. I need to like have some kind of boundaries. I'll go with my top 3. I think I really enjoyed Ponderosa. I really like Hell Is Round the Corner. And I felt a soft spot for Brand New Your Retro. I think those would be my top 3 picks.
Interesting that you picked Hell Is Around the Corner, which is also it uses the same sample as one of the most famous Portishead tunes. And I like to think that that's because maybe it was a tune that was regularly played around the sound systems in Bristol. Yeah, I have no clue whether that's actually the case, or whether he just liked it and was brave enough to do it a year after Portishead had released a massive track with it with the same sample. But yeah, I like to think that it was because it was going around the scene at the time. Brand New Year Retro, as we've also mentioned, has that kind of more up-tempo sound.
And I'm sure that was just because of the mood I was in at the time of listening. And I'm sure if if we re-recorded this podcast a year on and I was listening to this album again, I'd probably pick different songs based on the mood of the moment.
No doubt, it's one of those albums. I would go also for Ponderosa, and I would go for Suffocated Love, which is just a beautiful track. I think actually one of the closest to just a straight up pop tune on there. And I would also go for Struggling, as I've already mentioned. It ticks the box for both having a sort of weird amount of emotional weight to it, whilst also being really kind of musically interesting in ways I like. It's musically interesting without being twiddly. It's really quite simple sort of structure, but works and sounds like nothing else I've ever heard. Cue your sting for the quiz.
I think just very quickly before we jump into the quiz, which I will do this thing for, I kind of forgot to bring it up, but I just wanted to circle back. At the start, you mentioned this being kind of something that you listened to in first year, and then because of that being kind of an inspiration for you musically in terms of what you listened to. But I also imagine it had an influence on your production as well.
Yeah, trip hop definitely did. I mean, less so Tricky, because Tricky I actually came to I probably only actually listened to the full album in lockdown, I reckon. I think before that I'd listened to individual tracks, but I came to the full album in lockdown. Which is what I was saying about like how it's so surprising how Tricky kind of does fall by the wayside, but he certainly did for me, and so it doesn't surprise me that he had for you as well. But yeah, trip hop was definitely like I never particularly kind of was keen on doing any one genre, but the closest that I ever sort of thought I would go to describing stuff I did was trip hop. Trip hop was a really common thing I'd come back to as like a way to construct sound, I suppose. So very much so.
I think I definitely picked up on those sounds. Yeah, okay. So I don't remember how I did it last time, but
it's got to be ever so slightly different every time.
Yeah, that's guaranteed, because my memory's not good enough to replicate it each time. But we'll go with something like, it's time for the quiz. Do 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 dun. There we go.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. I love that it's slightly different every time. But that felt remarkably close. But maybe it's just because I don't remember it either. You know what? As well, this one was difficult to come up with quiz questions for.
Is that a Freudian slip there?
Tricks.
Trick questions, because these are all just going to be trick questions.
Oh, that'd have been clever. That'd have been really clever. No, I didn't. I wasn't clever enough, nor did I have the time to think of that many trick questions. Also, I was gonna do questions about famous tricks or tricksters, but I was finding that hard to find anything interesting. And then I was like, okay, I can do facts about keys. You know, as in like not the things that you unlock a house with, although there is one of them as well. But the kind of the port-like places, you know, the places where boats go and that. It turns out really hard to find facts about that as well.
Not surprised.
There was a surprising number of articles when I looked for largest key in the world. There's a surprising number of articles about the largest key cranes in the world being transported to various places. So at first I was like, I can make a fact out of that. Where's the largest key crane? But there was lots of different articles in lots of different places. So clearly that's something that it's
disputed.
A lot of avid fans of.
Yeah.
Or disputed, yeah.
There's
some in London, apparently.
Very quickly admit something embarrassing to you? Because you're including a fact about an actual key that unlocks a door.
Yes.
When you first recommended this album last week, I wrote down tricky Max, like MAX, and then a plus sign, and then key, like key, KEY, because that's just what I heard you say. I didn't.
To be fair,
so it took me
that makes a lot of sense.
A second to actually find this album. I thought it was Max and the key.
I mean, Maxinquaye is quite an obscure album name.
It revokes my music nerd license, I think, doing that. But hey ho.
It's officially revoked. Right, so yeah, you're gonna have to put up with some really quite tenuously linked facts or quiz questions.
We love it.
But so instead of key, I went for a port. So what's the world's largest port? Start with that one.
Oh, whack a duck. Sorry, swearing.
You can bleep that out. It's okay.
It's gonna be somewhere in. Quack it out. Whack. I'll use that.
Please do.
Use that.
Yeah.
It's gonna be somewhere in China, I reckon. However, sadly, I don't know any of the names of Chinese ports. And I'm really scared to say, oh shit, something embarrassing that's like a really inland city. I'm gonna guess, I think Shanghai's coastal. I'm gonna guess Shanghai, the port of Shanghai.
Louis, you absolutely smashed it. That was incredible reasoning every step of the way, and you've got it. That
Yes.
was well earned, that one.
Point for me.
All right. Okay. The next tenuous one was I was trying to get Maxine in there somewhere, so I've gone for Maxim, famous Maxims.
Okay.
And I settled on who apparently coined the maxim, "Every cloud has a silver lining."
This one, I feel like I can. You've just what?
I've realised I've got to look up just to sort of beef out the fact a bit more, but I do have something in front of me.
This one, I feel like I can't work through quite as logically. Every cloud has a silver lining. Every cloud has a silver lining. This one's gonna have to be a complete stab in the dark. So I might as well just pick. Let's say it was Abraham Lincoln.
It wasn't Abraham Lincoln. I feel like I'd have guessed Shakespeare, but it wasn't Shakespeare either. But I feel like Shakespeare is just the answer to everything, isn't he? Really, when it comes to like sayings and words.
Words, yeah.
But yeah, that wouldn't have helped you. It's John Milton, apparently. I think, did John Milton do Paradise Lost or something like that? Or like Yeah, in his poem, this is what I was just looking up. Comus. Was I deceived, or did a sable cloud turn forth her silver lining on the night? There you go. That's the line. And that's the
more poetically
earliest known
written, but
reference.
less to the point.
Yeah. It feels a bit waffly, really, doesn't it? We're cultured on this podcast. It's very much a cultural podcast. Okay, and now this is the simple one. Well, it's not a simple answer, but a simple link to the question, I feel. The earliest remote key, as used for cars. And I'll give you a point for who produced it.
Oh.
And a point for the date, as in the year.
God. So we're talking about like a remote car key, and we're saying, oh my God, right, I'm gonna guess when you say who created it, do you mean like the car company?
Yeah, the company, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna say it was Ford.
Because
you
got that spot on.
Nice. Only because I feel like they're one of the older car companies.
It'd have been amazing if that wasn't a car company, though. You know, if it had been invented by some company, and then it would have been a trick question.
For it to be something really rogue. Yeah. Trick question.
I'm just really disappointed I missed that opportunity, but no, that's straight up, dead simple, spot on.
And I'm gonna go with 1936.
It's actually as late as 1980, which surprised me. Although actually, I have to add to that. This is like just, I think on Wikipedia it was like one of the earliest examples, but then they didn't offer any earlier examples. So it might be that the technology was around for longer. If you find anything on that, you're vindicated and you can claim those points.
I mean, in a way, I think you still got me with a trick question, because it feels like one of those ones where you're like, yeah, logically, 1980, that's when that kind of technology feels like it was kind of coming to fruition. And yet, because you asked, I was like, is this one of those things where, like, bizarrely, there was like a weird prototype back in the 30s?
Double bluff.
It is the double bluff.
Yeah, go on. I mean, that wasn't intentional, but I'll claim that one.
And I'll accept the no points. I'll take the half point on Ford, though. Happy with that. Happy coming out of those questions with 1.5 points.
I was going to give you a full point for that, but
I'll take a full point. If you're offering.
You're the one who's supposed
generous.
to be tallying. Yeah.
I haven't gone back through yet, but I will at some point. I'm sure of it. Eventually.
That sounds good.
Do you have any bad reviews for this album?
This one's just titled "Somebody Pinch Me." Dull, boring, pointless are just some of the words I could use. Maybe it comes alive after a reefer. Reefer. But I doubt it.
Fuck, that's brutal.
I just loved the use of after a reefer there. I just thought that was kind of quite fun. This next one's just by Massive Attack instead. And then sort of rambles about it for a little bit, and it says this album is completely overrated, like a really, really substandard Massive Attack. At some points, he even wholesale recycles loads of Massive Attack, as well as Portishead, lazy git, which would be somewhat forgivable if we were presented with a clever alternate musical context, but they aren't. Okay, then he just goes on to... I just kind of love the little inclusion of lazy git. To be fair, that feels more like fun-spirited, that one. I don't know why.
Maybe a little nod and a wink.
Seems either like... Yeah, a little bit. Something about the word git just seems quite fun sometimes, isn't it? The other guy either seems like an internet troll or is just genuinely really quite not a fun person.
You just got to feel sorry for them that they're missing out.
Missing out, yeah. Anyway, I'm sure there's more despairing kind of reviews out there, but that was my very quick search. You can...
No, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed getting a little glimpse into how the other half lives, you know. Shall I let you know my choice for when we next convene?
Yes, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so in the spirit of the early 90s, this is one from my childhood, and it is Park Life by Blur.
Yes. Yeah, I'd be keen because I wouldn't say I'm overly familiar with it. Like I know Part Life and Girls and Boys.
That's the thing.
But I wouldn't say it's one that I know back to back.
I knew it would be a risky pick because it is infamous, and I feel most people have listened to it. However, I feel like I have a connection with it because of like when and how I listened to it. That I feel like I can serenade you with a few interesting stories and takes, and I think it'd be fun to revisit an album,
A British institution.
A British institution, and an album that I've picked partly because it released very, very close to Maxinquaye. They released within a few months of each other, I think. So it's interesting getting very different sides of popular music of the time, because both of these albums blew up and were mainstream. I think Maxinquaye was mainstream in a way that took Tricky by surprise, but they both went massive, and they both sound completely different. And I thought that could be a bit of an interesting dichotomy to explore. Have these kind of be like a sister episodes, as it were.
I love that as a follow-on.
So that's my pick. If you're happy to give that a re-listen,
I'm very keen for that. And actually, I think that leaves me with exactly the closing remarks that I needed. I didn't know what to say closing off the podcast, but I'm going to stir up some controversy here. It's not that I'm abandoning my northern roots as such, but I'm just going to say that Blur were always the more interesting, just generally better band than Oasis.
I 100% agree.
Oh. It doesn't get more crazy than that. We've really, we've thrown ourselves in the deep end with that one. Bloody hell, Louis.
And on that bombshell, yeah, I'll just wrap it up and say, as per, thank you all for listening. Shout out to Ronan's family. You're all really cool. Thanks for giving us a listen. Sorry for the swearing. We'll try better next time on this time. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. You can find us on all your favorite listening platforms. We also are on YouTube, and we have an email. If you have any thoughts and feelings to email in, it's more or something else entirely at gmail.com. I'm going to have to start putting in the description so that you can just kind of copy paste it, because I imagine typing that all out is a bit of a pain, as I now know, because it's become one of my most typed strings of words. And we now also have an Instagram page, which, as Ronan suggested, I think I'm going to try and start doing little snippets. So you can find us on Instagram at more of something else entirely as well. And I think that's everything. And once again, thank you very much for joining me, Ronan, and thank you for introducing me to another really interesting listen.
Well, thank you, Louis. Pleasure as always. That felt like quite a grown-up kind of response right there. I felt, like very professional.
It did.
Nice one.
The communists have nothing to offer but fat cheeks and eyeglasses and lying policemen. And the capitalists proffer napalm and money in green suitcases to the naked. And the communists create heavy industry, but the heart is also heavy.